Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me well. My name is Oleksii. I'm a clinical trial monitor for the Institute of Clinical Trials and CRFG. First of all, I would like to thank the Institute for Clinical Trials, Sonia, Fidelma, for organizing this educational event, which I suppose is very useful. To start with, we would talk about what is monitoring clinical trials, critical data, and process subject to monitoring output of monitoring, the main output. So firstly, what is the monitoring in clinical trials? So the monitoring is the act of overseeing the progress of a clinical trial and of ensuring that it is conducted, recorded, and reported in accordance with protocols, standard operating procedures, good clinical practice, and the applicable regulatory requirements. That's GCP definition, but it has to be said. So what would be the purposes of monitoring? They are to verify the rights, well-being of human subjects are protected. This is absolutely key. This is the main piece in clinical trials. This is what clinical trials are conducted for the future patients. So we have to protect their rights. We have to look that this is conducted in ethical manner. Another purpose is that the reported trial data are accurate, complete, and verifiable from source documents, meaning that in clinical trials, we want to obtain data that will be trustworthy, valid, and that would base the evidence, scientific evidence, and will be applied and maybe change medical practice. So the conduct of the trial is in compliance with the currently approved protocol, with GCP, and with applicable regulatory requirements. Yeah, we don't have to forget this is where we operate. It's highly regulated area, and monitoring is one of the requirements. So how monitoring is conducted is it is performed by clinical trial monitor or clinical research associate, as you may know, in accordance with risk-based monitoring plan, and is conducted on site. This is scheduled visits to investigator site where clinical trial is conducted. However, methods of centralized monitoring are also actively implemented as an addition to on-site or hybrid. Monitoring can also be remote. Remote monitoring can be appropriate in conjunction with procedures such as documented training, meetings, and extensive written guidance or telephone communication, where associated study risks are lower. However, it's also in scenarios like COVID, or we all experienced some problems in the past. So these scenarios should also be considered. So monitoring is a regulatory requirement. Appropriate monitoring is a requirement and not an option for regulated clinical trials investigations under clinical trial regulation, medical device regulation. However, if it seeks authorization in the United States, that would be FDA or other respective regulatory bodies. Extent of monitoring. So how far we go with monitoring is defined by the size and complexity of the study. As Veronica earlier mentioned, studies could be so different, and that would define the complexity of the monitoring. Also, objective and methodology of clinical trials and investigations, the degree of deviation of the intervention from normal clinical practice, risks associated with study intervention and study population, all of this has to be considered when the monitoring strategies are applied. So what the critical data and processes are subject to monitoring. So the types of critical data and processes ordinarily monitored are, so perhaps the main is verification that informed consent was obtained appropriately, was obtained before any study procedure has been taken or completed. Adherence to protocol eligibility criteria, so that to make sure that individuals for whom the investigational product may be less safe than the protocol intended, and to include only subjects from the targeted study population for whom it is most appropriate. So that this study population will represent what we seek from the clinical trial, from the future result. So other processes monitored are procedures for documenting appropriate accountability and administration of the investigational product. That could be the whole chain from receiving drug on site to dosing, storage. We need to make sure that all of it is properly documented, and that would be checked. That's a regular check. Also, the conduct and documentation of procedures essential to trial integrity, such as ensuring the study blind is maintained, both at site and at the sponsor level, and allocation concealment. Other types of critical data and processes ordinarily monitored are the conduct and documentation of procedures and assessments related to study endpoints, protocol required safety assessments, how site evaluate, document, and report adverse events, as well as serious adverse events, participant withdrawals, and reasons for withdrawing the study. Additional but not less important checks of data entry to electronic case report forms, sufficient training documentation, appropriate delegation of duties. I suppose one of the most important ones and quite common findings of people or personnel performing duties that they are not delegated to or not trained to. So it's one of the key checks. Adequacy of resources and facilities. That's also quite a common one, especially in our setting. So maintenance and calibration of any equipment used. That's also quite a common finding at inspections. Not mentioned to find some calibration certificates. So what is the output of monitoring? So the main output is monitoring visit report, and it provides details of the following. First, the main one is protocol violations and/or deviations identified, corrective and preventive actions in relation to identified violations, along with timelines for resolution. That's not limited. There's also the root cause, asking questions, why it happened, what can be done to tackle it, to prevent further, what documents should be reviewed, what approaches have to be changed. Perhaps it requires the change to protocol, to ICFs. A lot of things can be revealed. Also, data entry issues. To make sure that all required and essential information is entered in electronic database. Missing documentation, it's a issues with source documents, investigator site files. Depending on the severity of findings and specifications of monitoring plan, some following actions might be implemented by sponsors. It's not exhaustive list, it's just some examples. it is as a result of a risk-based approach that's following decisions or actions can be implemented by sponsor, increase of frequency of monitoring visits, increase to percent of sample for source data verification performed by monitor, and even stop and recruitment at a particular site might be considered in case of systemic non-compliances that significantly affect participants' right and safety and or data integrity of the study. Because participant safety should not be must not be jeopardized, and participants should be protected in the clinical studies. So no clinical trial investigation is perfect. Scenarios and actions presented on the previous slide do not necessarily occur if clinical trial investigation is conducted in safe and ethically sound manner with adherence to study protocol, GCP, regulations, SOPs, and applicable guidelines. Clinical trial monitoring promotes following principles. The first one is a constant state of audit readiness. You don't have to wait until auditor or inspector knocks your door. It should remain, all the documentation should remain in audit readiness. I know it's very hard to achieve, but this is what monitoring as first step of QC might identify. I perfectly should. Before it's identified at next levels of checks and inspections. Also, increasing the transparency by following Alcoa plus principles, as Aidan mentioned in her presentation earlier, in particular attributability, knowing who performed what, when, and providing a proper level of detail to reconstruct events in clinical trials. And of course, the main one of the main ones is, if it wasn't documented, it never happened. It's a sort of mindset to be used in clinical trial is to properly document all the events in the study. So here in the Institute for Clinical Trials, we possess expertise. We have procedures in place for monitoring of clinical trials and investigations. Also experience in monitoring of different phase clinical trials, medical devices in various therapeutic areas. So if you have any questions to clinical trial monitoring, we could answer these questions. We have experience and expertise. So please welcome. And thank you for listening. I hope that was useful. If not, I hope you just enjoyed me being here.